Unsung Murder Ballads discusses topics of a disturbing nature.
And we're not going to hold back on the graphic details and disturbing content.
So we do not recommend our podcast for children under the age of 13.
And while we respect the victims and their families involved in these tragic cases,
we're also going to be critical of mistakes that are made during the investigations.
And we're going to use dark humor to express ourselves now and then.
So with that said, this podcast may not be for everyone.
And that's okay. We're glad you're here checking us out.
And if you've made it this far, welcome to the Unsung Murder Ballads family. And follow us on Instagram at Unsung Murder Ballads if you want to talk to us.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Unsung Murder Ballads. This is episode 70. I am Janus Dead.
And I'm Jameson Dead.
Well, all right. So tonight we have a listener request, but I'm also gonna be pairing that up with a second case because despite the fact that this is in a very intense case, there's not a lot of information there on it. So it's gonna be short. So we're gonna pair it up with another episode, another case, not another episode.
I'm just hoping it doesn't leave us on a cliffhanger here because those are always the hard ones.
Well, it's funny that you say that because you're the one who loves the unsolved cases.
I do, but there's difference between the unsolved ones and ones that leave you on a cliffhanger. Because even though it may be unsolved, some of them you have all the information that you can get at the time. And then there are some where they're just leaving you hanging, leaving you with more questions and answers.
Yeah, well, like I said, you're the one who likes these kind of cases, so I almost gave this to you to present, but then I was like, no, I want to get this done fast. Not that you're not fast, I'm just saying. And so I just, this has been longer than I thought it would be before we got to it. So I just wanted to kind of make sure we got this out there. But aside from, there is a book based around this, but I honestly, between work and doing this and editing and all the research, I don't have time to read too many books anymore, unfortunately. So I didn't have time to read the book on this. So I'm basing this off of news reports and everything I could find. But yeah, it's an unsolved case, and it's an old unsolved case.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So I don't really have a good teaser for you because of how short this is. This one, I have a teaser for the other one, which I'm starting that other one with, which is just awesome. This one, all I can really do is say this involves potentially Nazi spies.
Oh, God.
Yes, exactly. So here we go. This is the story of Hazel and Nancy Frome. Now, I did try looking that up because the name Frome rang a bell in my head. And Lynette Squeaky Frome was one of the Manson family members.
Oh, okay.
And she had actually tried to kill Gerald Ford and was arrested.
Shit.
Yeah, and so she was one of two women who actually tried to kill Gerald Ford, which is crazy. So I looked that up, and the spelling is different, so I'm 95% sure they're not from the same family.
Okay.
But it would be an interesting tie-in. Yeah,
they were.
Exactly. The Frome family of Berkeley, California exemplified the mid-20th century American prosperity. Weston Frome, a top executive at Atlas Powder Company, made all the money needed to give his wife Hazel and his two daughters, Nancy and Maida, a life of pampered contentment. I kept those exact words. It was too good from this newspaper article I found. The three attractive, chic Frome women traveled extensively. They shopped, and they took a prominent part in the Bay Area society. Now keep in mind, this is like San Francisco Bay, that kind of thing.
Well, I mean, if they're able to afford the Bay Area, that's pretty damn good.
Well, this was back in the 1930s, so I'm going to assume it's not as expensive as it is now.
I don't know. I mean, at the time, I'm sure that area had some expensive stuff.
Maybe. And it was before the hippie age where, Haight-Ashbury may have kind of brought the market down a little bit. I don't know. I wasn't there. The Fromes could have stepped right out of a magazine ad. That's how they looked. And the icing on the cake was the family's seemingly endless good fortune. Because Weston Frome won a lottery. Even though he was already rich, he won a lottery where the prize was a lavishly equipped, brand new silver Packard car.
Why do things like that always happen to people that don't need it?
I have no answer for you. Maybe because it is really all random and there's no plan. So
Either that or, they don't have a soul, so they just fill it with material possessions.
maybe. But he gave that car to Nancy, his daughter, as a college graduation present. And this would prove to be one of the worst decisions he made throughout his life. So
Wow.
Yeah, this sucks. So 1938. So this is before the start of World War II, at least for the U.S. So in 1938, that year wasn't going well for Nancy. Her fiance, a San Francisco optometrist, broke off their engagement. She was upset and anxious to get away from it all. So in March, at 23, she announced that she would like to take a train and cross the country to visit her sister, who was married to an active duty Marine stationed in South Carolina. However, Hazel, her mom, worried about her young daughter making such a long trip on her own, so she came up with an alternate plan. How about the two of them take her brand new car and drive across the country on a road trip together? Sounds good, right?
Yeah, what could go wrong?
So the mother and daughter who love traveling, this would be a great time, a good adventure. Nancy readily agreed, and the pair were soon on their way. The road trip was uneventful until they reached West Texas, where the Packard developed engine trouble. The local auto repair shop had to send for replacement parts for the luxury car, leading to an unavoidable delay before it could be fixed. Now, I know Texas isn't Alabama, but this makes me think of the scene from Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Where the guy needs to order everything and it'll take 2 weeks to get there. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what it makes me think of. So rather than just sit in their El Paso hotel room, the women took a tour of the town and its sister city, Juarez, Mexico. I can only assume Juarez was probably a lot safer back then.
I was going to say, just off the bat, that sounds like the more dangerous place. But considering the time period, I'm guessing it probably wasn't nearly as bad.
Yeah, this is before cocaine, or before Pablo Escobar really blew up the cocaine market. So it's before all the big cartels. So yeah, I would assume it's much safer in terms of that. So 5 days later, on Wednesday, March 30th, their car was finally ready for them to go. When the Froms came to pick up their Packard, they asked for directions to Dallas, and at about 10:30 a.m., they resumed their trip. The following afternoon, 2 Army surveyors found their car parked on the side of a lonely road 11 miles west of the town of Balmora. They reported their find to their sergeant, who in his turn notified the Reeves County Sheriff's Office. 2 deputies arrived on the scene and they were completely baffled. The car was unlocked and the keys were in the ignition. There was no luggage or anything that would identify the car's owner anywhere to be found. Aside from a couple minor scratches, the car was in perfect condition. So they sat there wondering why anyone would abandon a brand new, expensive car in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, that is quite alarming.
Yeah, I mean, that should make anyone raise an eyebrow. So the California license plate enabled the sheriff, Lewis Robertson, to at least determine who owned the car. And when Weston Frome was contacted, he became hysterical, immediately assuming that his wife and daughter were both dead.
Yeah, I mean, I don't blame him at all.
No, not at all. That would be my assumption too, because there's no reason to have left the keys in there. A search was immediately launched using all of West Texas's available resources. Robertson drove the Packard back along the route the Froms had taken, asking at every stop if anyone remembered the car and the women driving it, but no one had remembered them. Law enforcement, volunteers, and members of the Civilian Conservation Corps searched the area on foot and horseback, which makes sense, it's Texas. Even the Coast Guard was called in,
Wow, they're really pulling everybody in. Holy crap.
Right, and that's a little weird to me because the Coast Guard in that part of Texas, okay, sure. I don't.
Why not?
Yeah,
Just
why not?
Use all the resources.
Is there a river? I don't know. Despite these efforts, no clues to the women's disappearance were found until 5 days later when
Whoa.
when an El Paso truck driver named Jim Millam went to police with a strange story. Early Wednesday afternoon, he was driving from El Paso to Wickett, and a silver Packard had passed him about 13 miles west of Sierra Blanca. Closely following the Packard was a dark coupe with 2 license plates and white writing on the right door. Both cars were traveling east. 2 hours later, 6 miles west of Van Horn, he saw the same coupe driving towards him slowly along the edge of the highway, and a woman was driving the car.
Uh-oh.
20 minutes later, the Packard passed him again, heading east, driven by a man. So following the Packard was the coupe with a female driver. So Millam took investigators to the spot where he saw those things, saw the vehicles, and they searched the area, and it was Millam who found the bodies of Hazel and Nancy Frome. Their deaths had been unusually brutal. Although both were nearly naked, neither women had been sexually assaulted.
Really? Wow.
According to reports. However, they were gruesomely abused in other ways. They had been badly beaten. One of Hazel's forearms looked like the flesh had been bitten off.
Oh, God.
And Nancy's right hand had been burned to the bone.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
Oh, that makes me cringe.
So death finally came when they were shot execution style in the head. It was
At that point, do you just want to be put out of your misery? Holy crud.
I would assume death would be welcomed, yes.
Yeah, my God.
So it was as if someone had tortured the women in order to obtain something from the Froms that they wouldn't or couldn't provide. So a massive manhunt was launched, and basically they're looking for very, very dangerous murderers, and investigators were flooded with tips. Other motorists remembered on that day that the Froms disappeared. The Packard seemed to be followed by another car containing several people, but that promising clue wound up going nowhere. At first, law enforcement assumed that the obviously wealthy women were the victims of a random highway robbery. However, the fact that a diamond watch and Hazel's gold wedding ring that were left inside the car forced them to abandon that theory.
Wow. Yeah, so that was my first thought, is it was money or expensive goods. Apparently not.
My thought is, if they really wanted something of value, they'd have taken the car too, at
True.
least for parts. Perhaps some lawmen thought the women were mistaken for drug smugglers and tortured to force them to turn over their stash of drugs. The El Paso sheriff was of the opinion that the savagery of the murders indicated a personal motive, that someone they knew from California was for some reason inspired to take some sort of bloody revenge on the women. Or maybe, he suggested, the Froms were murdered by people they encountered in Juarez. As promising as all these theories initially sounded, no real evidence could be found for any of it. For all their efforts, law enforcement came up with no solid leads, let alone any suspects, for the very sinister deaths of Hazel and Nancy Frome.
That's got to be so frustrating.
I can't even imagine. It remains one of Texas's creepiest murder mysteries. Now, over the years, there have, of course, been efforts by armchair detectives to solve the case. One of the more interesting scenarios was laid out by former journalist Clint Richmond in his 2014 book called Fetch the Devil. Now, it's built around the fact that in 1930 San Francisco, the German consulate was a hotbed of Nazi spies being led by Baron Manfred von Killinger. Now, at the time of the murders, there were also many German agents operating around the Mexican border. Richmond believed that Weston Frome, as a German-born executive of a major explosives company, was targeted by Nazis in order to learn his business secrets. Seems a little far-fetched to me, but we're rolling with it.
Yeah, I'm just trying to sort that out in my head. Like that does seem really out there.
Yeah, okay, he's a German guy. He owns a business that manufactures explosives. Apparently there were Nazi spies in San Francisco. Maybe. It seems like a lot. So according to this book, Fromm rebuffed all efforts to either bribe or blackmail him, and the German agents then went after the more vulnerable targets of his wife and daughter. So Richmond noted that while the Fromms were stranded in El Paso, Nancy had come down with a really bad cold. As the regular hotel doctor was away, a hotel bellboy referred them to a local doctor named Wolfgang Abel. Unfortunately for the Fromms, Dr. Abel was part of an extensive Nazi spy chain which operated through San Francisco, Latin America, and Berlin. Now,
Wow, talk about wrong place, wrong time.
it's weird, right? Like, is that true? Is this speculation? It just seems hard for me to swallow. That's all. Now, Hazel was a chatty, outgoing woman, so Richmond thought it was likely that when she learned the doctor was German, she mentioned to him about her husband's similar ancestry, as well as his important position at Atlas Powder Company. Abel, according to this scenario, called his boss, von Killinger, and reported his encounter with the women. The spy master instantly recognized the Fromm name and saw this as an opportunity to finally get some leverage over Weston. Von Killinger instructed Abel to do everything in his power to exploit this unexpected gift while the women were still in the area. Abel, again, according to this book, first sent 2 Russians, Romano Trotsky and G.N. Gepke, to try to romance the Fromm women. However, the mother and daughter merely laughed off their efforts. While the Fromms were at the hotel, a letter was dropped off for Hazel at the front desk. Although it is not known what the letter said, it clearly upset her and her daughter. Richmond
Now I
theorized
kind of want to know what's in that letter.
it would be amazing to find out that this was all true. It really would.
Yeah, no kidding.
So Richmond theorized that the Nazi agents wrote Hazel threatening to expose Weston's minor secrets, either real or fictional, and it caused the 2 women to panic and flee as soon as they could. When Abel learned that the Fromms were preparing to leave, he quickly enlisted Trotsky and Gepke and an unidentified woman in a plan to waylay the mother and daughter. On the remote Highway 80, the spies were able to force the Packard off the road. After that, it was a simple matter to detain the Fromms at gunpoint. The men forced their way into the Packard, ordering Nancy to drive. Abel's female agent followed them in Abel's car. The Fromms were taken someplace isolated, where Abel's thugs could question them under torture. Now, based on their deaths, again, this makes sense in a lot of ways, especially if they weren't sexually assaulted.
Yeah. Oh, I totally agree.
So meanwhile, Abel searched the Packard for the incriminating letter that Hazel had received. Unable to find it, he abandoned the car, taking the Fromm luggage to be searched at his leisure. Despite the terrible abuse the women suffered, they proved to be as stubbornly uncooperative as Weston had been. When Abel reported to von Killinger his failure to get information out of the Fromms, the spy master said that there would be no other option but to murder them. So accordingly, the women, probably already near dead after hours of torture, were brought to the remote area where their bodies would later be discovered, and they were shot there.
That's so tragic.
Even if it's only half true, it's fucking crazy.
It's seriously, like, that's just out there.
Yeah, not something you would expect, ever.
Not at all.
The debacle of the attempt to recruit the Fromm women and the even more unwelcome publicity of their murders caused the spies to quickly tie up loose ends. The bellboy who had summoned Abel to treat Nancy's cold was kidnapped, taken into Mexico, and killed.
Oh, shit.
Yeah. Baron von Killinger was recalled to Germany, far away from the reach of any investigators who might stumble across the link between his spy ring and the now infamous murders. By the time Dr. Abel was arrested in December of 1941, the Fromm case was so cold it never even occurred to anyone to note his possible connections to the mystery.
Oh, man, come on.
The Nazi spies may have failed in their espionage activities against the Fromms, but they were very successful when it came to killing them. Richmond's scenario may sound like something out of a cheesy spy thriller, but it's not impossible and would explain many of the odder elements of these unusually odd murders. It is still possible that someday some information will emerge to prove whether or not his theory is correct, and these are a couple of additional notes here. First, El Paso Sheriff Chris Fox, who spent years trying to solve this case, did manage to uncover a couple of interesting details which might or might not have been significant. When he interviewed family members, he learned that Weston and Hazel Frome had marital problems for some years. In fact, they were separated at the time Hazel made her fatal road trip.
Wouldn't that be wild if he was in on it?
If he orchestrated the whole fucking thing, that'd be
Yeah.
crazy. That he actually was a German spy the whole time.
Oh, God, that'd be even worse.
Second, in one of those unbelievable coincidences which often kind of dot these true crime cases, it transpired that on the day the Froms disappeared, there was another silver Packard with California plates containing 2 women driving down Highway 80.
What? No way.
Yeah. Sheriff Fox was able to contact these women and satisfied himself that there was no connection between them and this case. So that leads people to wonder if perhaps the Froms were mistaken for someone else, which would be even worse.
That's insane. Like, oh,
Can you
once
imagine?
again, just wrong time, wrong place.
Absolutely batshit crazy. And that's it. That's the case of Hazel and Nancy Frome. We have no more information.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, just super cliffhanger there.
I mean, that book is out there. You can look it up, but I hate to say it, I don't have time to read anymore, which is terrible. The only thing I get to read are, researching cases. And in terms of reading a book, I don't have time. It's crazy. So thank you, Lynette, for recommending that one. I appreciate it. That one threw me for a loop. And yes, Lynn, we see everything you comment on Spotify. Thank you very much. We appreciate that.
We love the interaction. We love hearing from you guys and knowing what you think and what you feel and what you like and what you don't like and all of it.
Yes, and I do want to say one thing. All of our listeners out there, we had someone leave really, really harsh, horrible feedback against myself and Joyous. They basically called us both annoying and kind of blasted us a little bit. Yeah, they kind of blasted us.
That's awful.
And as a result of that, soon after, because I ended up blocking this person, but soon after, our Spotify score went from a 4.8 down to a 4.6.
Oh, what?
Yeah, so I'm fairly certain at least this one individual gave us some shitty star reviews. We've never asked for this before, but I am going to ask anyone who really appreciates what we do, please go on to Spotify, please go on to Apple Podcasts, and leave us some feedback, leave us some star ratings. Let's kind of counteract this asshole who really felt the need to kind of dump all over us. We personally don't care. We thought it was funny for the most part, but the star rating, that kind of pissed me off a little bit.
It's really sad when people have nothing to do on their hands but, make fun of people for doing what they love.
Yeah, and mostly it was about the fact that we're laughing, we're having our sort of fun, and even though it's in the disclaimer that we used dark humor, some people can't let go of that.
I was just about to say, listen to the first thing that pops up before you listen to the episode.
Yeah. And so our take on this initially was, whatever, this isn't the podcast for you, but for whatever reason, this person kept listening and kept hitting us with this negative feedback, and it was like, we're not going to change for you. This is what we do.
Yep.
So yeah, so we would appreciate if anyone who does like us, go out and give us some ratings. Let's counteract those negative ones, but because we love all of you guys, and we're glad you're here.
Of course. Thank you all so much.
All right, now on to the second case. And I'm not even going to tell you the name of the victim. I'm just going to dive right into my little sort of teaser.
Oh boy, let's go.
So Lake Crescent in Olympic National Park, Washington, has had its share of dead bodies, as many lakes do. In fact, as a little Easter egg to our second episode on Israel Keys, it's believed that he dumped at least one body in this lake.
No way. Holy
Yes.
crud.
So according to legend, the Klallam and Quillette tribes fought a bloody battle beneath Mount Storm King. The mountain became angry and broke off a chunk of rock from its peak and threw it into the valley over the battlefield. The rock killed warriors and dammed the river, creating Crescent Lake. Generations of Native Americans would not go near the lake because of this legend. It is said that Crescent Lake never gave up its dead. That is, until the Lady of the Lake surfaced in 1940.
Oh, yes.
The body was wrapped in blankets and tied with rope. But that's not the spooky part. The body's skin had turned into a rubbery substance and was perfectly preserved.
What?
Yes. It was not bloated like most bodies held in water would be, and there was no decay.
That's insane.
She was perfectly preserved other than missing facial features, fingers, and toes. Now, the body also showed evidence of having been beaten and strangled. And doctors, when they described the corpse, like what it looked like, they said it was like ivory soap. They called it an ivory soap corpse because of the skin's condition.
That is the most unique description I think I've heard in a while.
It's bizarre. Now, the skin looked like this because of a process known as saponification, which converts fatty acids into soap. So it's basically,
Wow.
it's basically how you make soap with like animal fat. That somehow that happened to this body, and the murdered woman became known as the Lady of the Lake. So Lake Crescent's depth is not known. How deep it is isn't known with any real certainty, but it's likely that there are parts that are deeper than 1,000 feet. So when the body had been submerged in the deep waters of the lake, the cold prevented the decomposition, and the salts and calcium in the water slowly converted the tissue into a material like soap. And just like soap, a body that converts in this manner floats. So although there had been apparently an attempt to weigh it down, the ropes connecting to the weights eventually decayed, allowing the body to float to the surface. And even though there was no facial recognition or fingerprints, police made a positive identification of the body because of the physical match, the hair color, and dental records. And though there was little to make any kind of identification, the body did have a distinctive upper dental plate. But the police also had one clue as to who the killer was: the rope. The rope, it seems, was particular to Sears and Roebuck, and through receipts, it was tracked to a tavern owner who had bought it to tie up his boats. Now, the tavern owner remembered that a beer salesman borrowed 100 feet of that rope to pull his truck out of the mud, but he had never returned the rope, and that beer salesman was named Montgomery Illingworth. And
Already sounds like trouble.
And the victim was his wife, Hallie Latham Illingworth.
Oh, God.
This is the story of the Lady of the Lake, and it starts at a tavern on the edge of Crescent Lake in the northwest part of Olympic National Park. This fucking case is nuts. And I have to tell you, I love that opening scene. That once I learned that and I got to tell that, I was like, this is awesome.
Oh, definitely.
So Hallie arrived on the Olympic Peninsula about 3 years earlier after 2 failed marriages. She was born in Kentucky on January 8th, 1901 to a farm couple. Like basically she was born on a farm, which again, 1901, there isn't much else other than farms. As a young adult, Hallie repeatedly moved west in search for a better life. It was in 1936 that Hallie started working as a barmaid at a tavern on Lake Crescent. So at the age of 35, she had just ended her second marriage. But Hallie gave it another try and married a man named Montgomery Monty Illingworth in June of that year. He was a beer truck driver, and she had just met him at the tavern. Poor Hallie, unfortunately, had a bad habit of choosing the wrong man. Monty didn't even bother hiding the fact that he was beating her.
Oh, God. That's malicious as hell.
1936, somehow, I'm not surprised. Hallie would come to work with bruises and black eyes, and she would confide in a coworker that Monty had choked her and broken one of her teeth.
Oh.
What the fuck? After just 5 months of marriage, the police were called to break up a fight between them in the early morning hours outside of the tavern. Yet, like many victims of domestic violence, Hallie stayed.
Oh my God, that's crushing.
After the night and morning of December 21st and 22nd, no one saw Hallie again. Now, good old Monty, he told everyone that Hallie had run off with a sailor from Alaska. But, no one really bought his story.
Okay, good. Because if people were going to fall for that happy horse shit, I'd be disappointed.
Yeah, even back in the 1930s, they knew this guy was full of shit. So despite suspicion, Monty was granted a divorce in 1938.
Are you kidding me? What?
Yeah, somehow after her being gone for over a year, they allowed him to divorce her. He then moved to California with the roommate of Hallie's sister, a woman that he had been seeing romantically since before her disappearance.
Well, that's just fucked up.
So on July 6, 1940, almost 3 years after Hallie disappeared, 2 fishermen spotted the body of a woman floating on the surface of Lake Crescent. An autopsy showed that the woman had met a violent death. Her neck was bruised and discolored. Her chest showed evidence of extensive hemorrhage. She had been beaten and strangled. Though there was little with which to make any identification, the body had that unique upper dental plate. It proved to be the clue that led to her killer, along with the rope. So on October 26, 1941, Illingworth was arrested and taken into custody by Los Angeles Sheriff's deputies. He was then extradited from California and stood trial for Hallie's murder. The trial began on February 24, 1942, and was so sensational that it competed for the news with the front lines of what was happening in World War II.
Wow, that's intense.
Can you imagine? Like, so you're sitting
No
there
way.
watching the news and it goes from the war to that. That's how sensational it was.
Like, wow, oh my God.
Trial developments were splashed daily across the front pages of local newspapers. And in terms of the actual court, spectators arrived early. Homemakers, teenagers, and curiosity seekers converged on the courtroom for the 9-day trial.
It's like going to a concert.
Right? Illingworth's defense was that the dead woman wasn't Hallie, and he swore that she was alive the last time he saw her. Hallie's friends were able to identify her because of the clothing worn by the dead woman that had been found, and they insisted it belonged to Hallie. And of course, her dentist testified to her identification. Now, a contemporary of Hallie's later observed that her murder was most likely not premeditated, that Hallie and Illingworth probably had a fight in their apartment that night in December in 1937. The fight probably took a violent turn, and Illingworth brutally beat and strangled Hallie to death. A man by the name of Hollis Fultz, a criminologist with the Washington State Attorney General's office who helped investigate the murder, maintained that Monty tried to conceal the crime by placing his wife's lifeless body in the trunk of his car and driving to Lake Crescent. Monty then stopped in the vicinity of the present-day log cabin resort, where he wrapped his wife's body in blankets and tied the bundle with rope. Monty put Hallie's body in a rowboat, attached weights to the bundle, and rowed into the deep water. He then dropped the bundle into the dark water. Rumors circulated during the murder investigation that Monty didn't act alone, but no one other than Monty was ever charged with the crime.
I don't know. I can just see him being sadistic enough to do it on his own.
Yeah, I don't think he worked with anyone else, because if that had been the case, something else would have happened. Someone else would have spoken up. It took the jury 4 hours to reach a verdict, and they found Illingworth guilty of second-degree murder.
4 hours to figure out that?
Well, I mean,
Come on.
1940 something? Who knows, man. He was sentenced to life in prison at the Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla. Incredibly, Illingworth served only 9 years in prison and was paroled in 1951.
Are you shitting me? What?
How it is that a pathological man didn't even serve a decade for Hallie's murder is beyond me. That's literally my next line.
No kidding.
Fucked up.
Holy crap.
Crazy. He died on November 5th, 1974 in Los Alamitos, California. And the Lady of the Lake is a story that is oddly preserved, just like the corpse that was found floating in Lake Crescent. And that's our second story.
Wow.
Fucking crazy.
Man, he got off too easy.
Well, yes, agreed. And one thing I didn't go into because I only saw it in one source, but according to one source on this, when one of those fishermen touched the body, he was able to scoop away part of the flesh just like you would soft soap.
Oh, God.
Yeah, I don't know how true that is because it was only in one source. But
Okay.
holy shit.
Yeah. Oh, God.
So, yeah, that's the case of the Lady of the Lake.
Man, I feel so bad for her.
I do too. She didn't do anything to deserve that except maybe pick really shitty men. You know?
That, unfortunately, it's because she didn't know any better. She couldn't get out. If she had gotten out, I don't think we would have had the Lady of the Lake.
Agreed. But she did make, it was her third marriage, which meant she had made mistakes prior. And from what I read, they were also abusive, or at least that so bad that she had to get out. I don't know. The whole thing's crazy. I'm certainly not victim blaming. Don't get me wrong.
No, I don't think you are.
But it just leads to that. And I think loneliness has that impact, has that effect on people where they just they're so lonely that they'll take what they can get and they put up with shit they shouldn't put up with.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate. And in this case, leads to really horrible things.
Yeah, it's a very tragic case. It very much reminds me of the Lady of the Dunes that we covered that was here in Cape Cod.
Oh, yeah, yep.
Yeah, it's just crazy. At least they identified her quickly, where the Lady of the Dunes took decades. But yeah, the whole thing's sad. And amazingly, if her body hadn't been preserved the way it was, we may never have known who she was.
Oh, yeah. That was an absolute miracle.
Yes. And the whole thing about it is just bizarre. The science of it, turning someone into soap. Really?
Well, imagine
bizarre.
being the people who saw it in person.
Had that been me, I would have thought that wasn't a real person. I would have thought I found some weird, I don't know, weird soap person. I would have thought it was fake, like a mannequin. I don't think I would have called the police. I don't know. Just bizarre. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. That's episode 70. I am Janus Dead.
And I'm Jameson Dead.
And we'll see you in a week.